The Crow. By John Guinness. It is said that the mountains of the Perch were all volcanoes once, violently active and explosive. The Crow that lived there were from Anthrop tribes of western Sugar, whom the Shugaramen long broke away from. Instead, the Sugari wandered around the desert in their nomadic fashion, whose pattern was long committed to the ages, following the hunt in the skies above. From out of the number of these distant relatives, whose numbers today dwindle dangerously, there came the crow, who was the smartest of all the birds. They forsook their hominid form and lived as the Koroi tribe. The magpies, rooks, ravens, and the crow set out to the mountains and eked out a shameful living from the rocks there. They'd fly down to the gardens of the Waken, and pick them bare of seed, then fly back to their rocky outcrops. Hence the craggy valleys between the volcanoes came to be called the Perch. They took with them the blackbirds, who asked to come. They thought they might make good servants, and no one else wanted to come, so they permitted it. The smoke and magma from the volcanoes greatly annoyed them all, making life almost intolerable. Until there came a wizened man dressed in only sackcloth, who told them a secret. Keek. Cast ye, every year from now, the body of a living child, into the molten rock in the caldera of the nearest volcano, and it shall not one bubble of hot rock gurgle, for a year. The birds considered this advice. Who is this stranger? What do you have to gain by telling us this, Jonah? The raven cocked its head. Do you think it'll spare you from fate's design? We will pull you apart, and throw whatever's left of you into the volcano. Yes, I expect you will, but it changes not a lick of what I've told, what you hear today, Keek the stranger cackled. And the tribe descended on him, shrieking and tearing what withered flesh, hair, muscle and organ the man had left to him, then they flew up to the corona, and cast the bones into the molten rock. A while after this in the winter, there came, upon some in the tribe, a raging fever. Revolting, sweaty convulsions that boiled the living brains alive, as they screamed and coughed, then passing. Afterwards, the survivors were changed, as their neighbors remarked, indelibly different from then on, not quite the same. One year, there came a horrific clamor outside the elder's chamber. 3 magpies ran in holding a bundle, a black baby bird, wrapped in cloths. Jonah, she is an orphan, her pregnant mother squeezed her out as a mammal kind, with her dying breaths. The fever took her, as it did the father 3 days prior. The elders tutted and fussed, is the child with fever too? They checked her temperature, her wings, beak, eyes, a healthy baby girl. All 3 shook their heads, we'll be off, then, unless you want us to take her. The elders muttered and clacked beaks, squawking and arguing, yes, perhaps she could stay with you while we find a home. Yes, Jonah. They took her away while the brood began to discuss the problem. Some of them offered to take her, and another knew a young family of ravens who would happily adopt her. Some others. The next morning, an angry mob of maybe 10 able-bodied corvidmen and women, of all the breeds of the Koroi, arrived at the elders' court, all of them fever survivors, now riled up and stirred into shocking anger, demanding audience and satisfaction. They chanted at the antechamber, we've heard there's an orphan blackbird. We demand this child. Then they burst into the unguarded, normally peaceful, chambers of the 5 elders of the Koroi tribe, shouting and screaming, where is the child? Where is the child? They demanded. There is no child, what are you talking about? The most senior of the Koroi, an elegant raven, who shimmered black and blue in the light, squawking in sharp, piercing, and rumbling caws, startling all gathered except his fellow elders. Some in the crowd now began to behave most strangely. They screamed and squealed louder than before, in convulsions, howling in tongues. The women shrieked the loudest, both men and women alike kicked and tumbled on the ground rough, some smacking themselves in the face, others flapping their wings irregularly, involuntarily. We demand the child. The roars now hummed and melded into chants of this demand, between the intermittent squawks, seizures and feverish flaps of the crowd. We demand the child. The raven pleaded with them. What child are you speaking of, you fools? You are not well. Return to your homes, eat, sleep, rest. Even if there was a child, what would we do? Give it to you lot when you're all clearly mad? You lie. Give us the child. He lies. There is a child. It's true, we saw it. Saw it in half. Two of the elders now broke into the frenzy, backing away from the altar where they'd sat with their brethren, to the head of the crowd. What are you doing? The raven, along with the magpie and rook elders, begged the crow and the blackbird now, to return to the altar, to please cease this madness, that they're unwell. The crowd fell silent and still now except for the two Korui elders, at the front of the gathered throng, that had swelled from 10 to 40 now, who spoke in unison. And no more. They broke off now, the crowd returned to renewed frenzy, flapping and cawing hotter and harder than ever, sweaty and juices running, only murderous intent between their fits of seizure. From there, it was a bloodbath. The elders were eviscerated by the flocking madness of the fever-touched, who proceeded to descend on their neighbors and their property violently, who raged through the rocky outcrops of the valleys and crags between the volcanoes. They came upon the home of the three magpie sisters, who were torn to pieces in the scuffle for the child, whom was snatched away. At the moment, all the fever-touched flew in a great crest to the corona of the volcano. Chanting and moaning still, in their feverish rants, through the toxic, putrid smoke and ash of the volcano, they tossed the child into the fires, and she exploded instantly into ash in the searing heat, gone. The fever-touched awoke from their stupor like a dream, as the earth shook and quaked madly underclaw. Some fell into the magma or down the mountainside, others took flight, orienting themselves in the sky as they fled to their homes, or anywhere, anyway, away from the shaking volcano. Then, like a flower blooming in reverse, the caldera of the volcano closed up before their very eyes, disappeared, into a mountaintop plateau. The formerly boiling rocks cooled and the steam passed, the ash cleared slowly with the prevailing wind, and the sun peered out through the clouds on those rocks for the first time. All the tumult ended, what was left was a mountainside no different than any other. While the other volcanoes raged on in the distance, spitting forth the guts of the earth in molten catastrophe, the Koroi tribe looked to what had happened. The fever-touched birds were gathered up by the survivors, who demanded an explanation. They found themselves unable to account for their actions, their memories of the event lost completely, and not just that. Some of them forgot everything altogether, their names, or their families. Others had lost decades or years of memory, fragmented like smashed glass, each shard an incalculable distance from its sisters.